How you going, guys? Welcome to the third episode of the BloodyOath podcast. On today's episode, I interview a good friend of mine, Augustus Hebblewhite, affectionately known as Gus, and we talk about Tabletop Simulator, some of the tournaments that are played on that, some of the pros and cons to that program, and the overall tournament meta in general. Gus has some interesting insights. He's played a lot more Tabletop Simulator games than anybody that I know, and he's also attended at multiple large-scale Tabletop Simulator tournaments. So getting his insight into this is a very exciting and interesting conversation for me. And also, Gus is a very statistically driven and data-driven person. So his way of understanding and communicating the statistics of the current meta is also very interesting. So if you're new to Tabletop Simulator, it's definitely a very highly valuable podcast, especially with a lot of the world's nations being currently in lockdowns or heading towards lockdowns or going back into lockdowns. I think Tabletop Simulator is a utility that we all should start having a play with and exploring, because those who get a lot of experience with Tabletop Simulator now are going to be the ones that excel in the real tournaments when they step back into the real world and when the wheels start churning again. So if you want to get a bit more of an understanding about Tabletop Simulator, understand the meta and the way that the tournaments function on that program, and also get a bit of a feel for the meta in general, then hopefully this conversation will be of high value. So without further ado, let's get into the conversation between me and Gus.
Blog for the Blood God presents the BloodyOath podcast.
So first, thank you very much for taking the time to sit down and have a conversation with me. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, no worries, man. Me too.
So, Tabletop Simulator is our topic, right?
Yeah, maybe Tabletop Simulator and the meta, something like that.
Yeah, something along those lines. So, for those living under a rock, maybe just tell us a little bit about what Tabletop Simulator is, because there might be some people who aren't familiar.
Sure. So, I guess for those living under like a really, really big rock, maybe news to hear that there's a bit of a pandemic happening at the moment.
Yeah.
So as a result,
you didn't need a pretty fucking big rock to not notice that shit, but yeah.
Pretty big rock. Because of this, in-person tournaments in Warhammer are very regionally restricted.
Yeah.
So they're still happening in some places, but Australia, especially Victoria, we haven't had much at all.
Yeah.
But there's a game called Tabletop Simulator, and in it, there's actually quite an active community of people who are essentially playing 40k, sort of like you would on the tabletop.
Yeah. But
in like a physics simulator with, sort of computer models, I guess, and all of the sort of pros and cons that come along with that. But it's actually, like, once you get used to it, it's not that dissimilar to playing 40k on the table.
Yeah. I found my experience with it was it's a bit of a roller coaster. Like, when I first downloaded it, I was like, oh my god, this is the future of gaming.
Sure.
I'm like, I'm never buying another model again. This is fucking ridiculous. Like, why would you spend thousands of dollars on an army and then thousands of hours painting it when you can just be like, oh, copy paste, copy paste. And that's like, this is so good. And then you play, but when you play it, I found it a little bit clunky at first. It's just the way you're moving the minis and whatnot.
Yeah, definitely. So I think there's definitely some pros and some cons in terms of the pure, mechanical playing experience, right? So the thing I love the most, I don't know if this resonates with you, is like auras and like measurements. Everything is like precise. You can just press a couple of hotkeys and create like a 9-inch bubble around the mini you're using to screen your backfield. Yeah. But then for stuff like Horde, so I tried playing one of my friends, or our mutual friend Stuart.
Yep.
Where he was playing 150 termagants, and that was just like a real mess.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things.
Positioning is very hard.
Yeah, when we get into talking about your stats and the meta-analysis of it, really interesting to see whether or not the actual the differences between Tabletop Simulator and the physical, being that things like hordes are very punishing.
Yeah.
I wonder whether that's going to be reflected in the data, and whether or not hordes might be really good in 9th edition, but just not
on Tabletop Simulator for that exact reason.
Yeah, there are definitely playability things like that impact. I guess on the other side as well, because as you're saying, you can just Control-C, Control-V and get as many models as you want. It allows for a much faster meta turnaround.
Yeah, that's true.
You don't have this hobby lag that you have in real life.
Yeah, new model comes out, new rules come out that are sick, and you just go, cool, well, I've got 100 of them.
Yeah, I scan it and exactly. Yeah. So it does definitely have some pros, and I think the pros, honestly, for me, are strong enough that even after things return to normal and, fingers crossed, this sort of vaccine, makes life sort of normal-ish, I think I'll still probably use it for maybe half my games, just because for prototyping lists.
Yeah, well, that was one of the main things that I was like, okay, well, this is an absolute game changer in the way that you could use it to supplement your normal 40k experience. You could be like, you know what, I want to try out a list that has 3 Lord of Skulls in it. Before I go out and spend $1,000 buying these 3 Lord of Skulls, maybe I want to play some games with it, and you play some games with it and you realise it's fucking garbage. And you're like, okay, well, maybe I won't spend that money.
I literally had that 2 nights ago. I decided, so me and one of our other mutual friends, Johnny, came up with this list for it was sort of something like 80 just Harlequins on foot. Just with a few close combat weapons, and the idea is you just play the primary and you just ignore pretty much doing damage. You just try and take objectives.
You rely on your speed and your survivability to just be everywhere and obsec on everything.
Exactly. And both of us were like, man, this is broken. This is unstoppable. And then I played it once and I was like, nah, this is trash. I
had the same conversation
not trash, it's not
with Rob, our resident Necron expert, and I was talking to him about why the fuck don't we just run 120 warriors? Who's killing that? I played a game where I couldn't even kill 20. If you've got 120, I'm like, you just fucking... I'm like... So maybe that's something with the Tabletop Simulator could help me test.
Exactly, it could. And maybe you'll see why it's bad, but maybe it's actually just a way of discovering the sort of really off-meta things before you have to invest in... Because, you can proxy on tabletop, but it just doesn't sort of feel the same.
Proxying on tabletop can be so confusing. When people are like, oh, these Primaris guys are actually normal guys, but this Terminator over here is actually just, it's just like, what the fuck?
This dice is a drop pod.
Literally we had that game last night where we had three cans of GW spray paint, and they were war walkers, and it was it's so ridiculous. So that's where Tabletop Simulator just completely solves that problem entirely, which is sick.
So in your experience, what did you like? So I sort of said what I like and dislike about TTS. What are your thoughts about?
There's a few things.
Because you played a few games.
I did play. I've played quite a few. I haven't attended any online tournaments or anything like that. That being said, one of the things that I do like the most about it is you can just hit up somebody in America and have a game. That's completely changes the whole dynamic, because I grew up in a rural town and I used to only ever be able to play against my brother. So we had a 2-man meta. Right? And the problem with that was I went out and bought all of my berserkers in rhinos, so he went and bought a Necron Air Force. And it was like, fuck you. Fuck you to the moon. This is ridiculous. So then I went, okay, I'm going to counter that, and I bought Bloodthirsters and Demon Princes, and I was like, yep, cool, now I've got this demon army.
Because Bloodthirsters have fly today, big wings, you'd hope so.
So it was like I could now punch his fucking flies out of the sky, so I was like, haha, suck a dick. And then he went and bought Grey Knights. And Grey Knights used to have this rule where, this was back in 5th edition maybe, where...
was that when they were OP? I know there was one edition, maybe it was 5th.
There's been a few. They've gone from being OP to garbage to OP to garbage. They've never been just good. But they had a rule where if they charge something that essentially has the demon keyword, they get to fight first. Right? Whereas it used to be initiative based, a characteristic that determined who fought first. So they had a rule where if they charge you, they fight first. And then there was a rule that if you charge somebody in terrain, they always get to fight first. So he would just put his army in terrain, and then he'd be like, okay, if I charge him, he'll go first and kill me. But if I don't, he's going to jump out, charge me, and then kill me. So I'm just like, I can't win. And I'm like, you're fucked, cunt. Like, this is so bad. So that's the problem with a two-man meta.
Yeah, two-man meta, right? Like, they're not great. Who knew, right?
And then the theory goes that the bigger, the more you scale the meta up, the better it becomes. Yeah. Because, you know, when you go, okay, well, now you've got a group of, like, 10 mates, you know, but if there's that one mate that's bringing, like, Raven Guard, spam, you know, a list, well, then your group of friends...
Wonder who that was.
I don't know. But yeah, then your group of mates will pivot around that, and then they'll start bringing, like, Harlequins with neg 6-inch range so that they can dodge your flamers, and, like, so you end up with a similar dynamic.
Sure.
But diluted, because it's not just a 1v1, and then you grow it up, and then this is why I think Tabletop Simulator does that no other event could even fathom, is they can go, oh, let's have a tournament with, I don't know, 30,000 people playing at once. It's feasible.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, the technology is there. Yeah, you've got you could literally have every single person who plays Warhammer could attend one tournament. Yeah. And actually find out who's the best. You know?
Sure.
And when it comes to try and analyse that meta, well, now you have to actually analyse the whole fucking globe.
Yeah.
You know? You can't just go, whereas like in Melbourne, you can go, okay, well, we know that the top 3 players in Melbourne, we know what lists, that type of list.
We know we have to have answers to that. We know that no one plays X, and so we don't have to worry about that.
Like, we know there's no decent Tau players in Melbourne, so it's like, you don't have to worry about that.
Yeah.
You know, so you can be like, but what happens if you go up against Tau? It's like, well, you're not going to. Yeah. So you don't have to worry about ignoring Overwatch because you're not playing Tau.
Definitely, yeah.
And even if you are, there might be a 100-player event, might have one Tau player. You know, and you're like, okay, well, it's pretty reasonable to think you'll dodge that.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're looking at a global Tabletop Simulator event, you can't make that assumption.
Yeah.
You actually need to do a proper analysis of the way that that's going to work.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think that's one of the biggest strengths of it, and something that I'd love to see, like some more global style tournaments, which is something that I wanted to attend. I just haven't really had the time to figure it out.
So the one thing I'd say there is that because Tabletop Simulator is a bit weird, like
there's definitely jank.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like some people love it. Like I sort of liked it up. I've played more sort of since lockdown started than I ever have in my life. I think, like probably 2-3 games a week.
Yeah, that's crazy.
But other people are just not into it because what they get out of 40k is, you know, much more about this sort of interpersonal thing with mates.
Yeah, well, that's one thing that, like, and this is one of the reasons why I haven't gone very deep into it, because for me, the primary thing about Warhammer, the main thing that I enjoy is the conversations that you have over the table and the banter and the social element.
Totally,
and that's just completely and utterly absent, in my opinion. Yeah. Like, I've had games with close mates on Tabletop Simulator and we don't have banter.
Yeah, sure.
Because it's when you're playing a game, you can easily be like, oh, he is going to charge him.
Yeah.
You can't do that when you're on tablet because, like, they can't see you.
Yeah, sure.
So you have to be very specific about who's charging who and very specific about what you're doing and communicating everything constantly to the point where there's no room.
There's not that opening for
there's no room for laughter and that sort of stuff, which is frustrating. So that's like one of the cons, I guess. Pros being the whole potential for a global meta.
For sure. But so where I was going with that is that I think like as much as I share your kind of like optimism for TTS as a platform that could have this really interesting thing of like lots of people getting into it. I think one of the challenges is that really it's a very specific kind of person who plays TTS. True, it's someone who is generally pretty keen. There are way like I think I've played more like WTC players than I have like new players on TTS. It's a very sort of high level of like very keen people who often like have a faction that they like to play. So that the meta is actually, at least in the tourneys I've played, not as fluid as you might think, just because I don't know, like I guess it's a lot of the people who are playing are kind of people who are almost like career faction X players.
Well, I think that's one of the best ways to actually be in that top like echelon of players, I guess, is to master a faction.
Sure.
You know, it's like you could take somebody who's practiced with a sword their entire life and they're they're amazing with their sword. You give that kind of bow and be like, trust me, mate, bow's better. And he's going to be like, I don't even know how to fucking use it. Like, it doesn't matter if it's a better weapon. I'm going to be trash with it. Like, let me go in there with my sword, you know?
Yeah.
So you get people that have they've played nothing but Eldar their entire life, and it's like even if Eldar are trash, they're gonna do better with that Eldar than if you went. Trust me, mate, you want to be on Grey Knights, and then you give them the Grey Knights list, and they're gonna fumble the fuck out of it. You know.
Yeah, so, I agree. That's definitely been my philosophy.
Yeah, so even with the freedom to be able to just download an army and you just have it now, people are still probably going to stick to their faction.
Definitely,
you know. Just so that, and also so that when they do attend a physical tournament, well, they're playing with the faction that they own.
Yeah, for sure.
So they're not getting whiplash from jumping from one faction to the next.
So that's another thing about it is that I think almost all of the people I've talked to on TTS who I've played against who are active in the tournament scene are doing it to try and get good at ninth for when we return to
for the
tabletop tournaments.
Sort of thing,
So I actually had someone describe TTS as like a hyperbolic training chamber from Dragon Ball Z.
Yeah, so
and I thought that was like a really good analogy. Yeah. And so I guess that maybe plays into it as well, where you know, and I definitely do this myself, right? I'm only really playing things that I have the models for in tournaments.
Yeah.
You know, give or take 10% of my army. So it still gives me the ability to just I wonder what it'd be like to take, 3 Reapers. I don't own any, but most of the army I do own. So if I did want to ramp this up, if this idea does pay off, I'm only needing to spend they're Forge World, so it's a lot of money, but
but it's just like stepping into an alternate reality where you have the access to all of these tools, all of these things, and then you can play it, and then when you step back into a normal reality, you can be like, okay, what's my new direction that I've figured out?
Definitely.
So that's good. And the other concern that I have with Tabletop Simulator is because you're just staring at a screen. When it's your opponent's turn and they're doing all this stuff, I found it really profoundly boring. Just sitting there looking at the screen while they're moving their models around. Whereas there's something about being physically there that's completely different. And also, because Tabletop Simulator allows you to measure things to the 0.01 of a fucking inch, there's a lot of players have that expectation of perfection with your accuracy, right? Which isn't unreasonable. Like, if you don't want somebody moving 6.3 inches when they have a 6-inch move. And on a physical tabletop, it's really easy for people to accidentally grab that quarter of an inch, here and there. But with that high level of accountability on Tabletop Simulator means that it's quite restrictive. But I worry that that's going to breed more pedantic players and take away from some of the fun of the game and the casual nature of the game, and everything's going to become mechanical and precise. And for me, that just sort of kills the fun.
Sure.
We'll
see. I wouldn't be surprised if less than 5% of 40k players are active on Tabletop Simulator.
Yeah.
So if that's true, and maybe it is, maybe I'm mechanically fanatic. We'll see. But I reckon that let's say we went to a GT, in a week.
Yeah.
Of the people who play TTS a lot, maybe it's 10% of the field.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Even if we look at our circle of friends, it's we've got some WTC players that we know that aren't playing Tabletop Simulator.
Yeah.
We've got, but then we've got also people like yourself and Stuart that are both pretty heavily into Tabletop Simulator. So it's I don't think it's going to be as big of a crossover. I think you're right with it, maybe 10% of people, but those people are going to have a significant advantage.
Yeah, going into ninth, I think I'm inclined to agree. Just because we haven't really had ninth without we haven't had a normal ninth yet.
Yeah.
I think that the actual launch happened when we were in lockdown, right? So
yeah, it did.
So
well, as far as I'm concerned, because I don't know whether you saw the announcement this morning, a bit of a tangent, but the Victorian restrictions have been essentially lifted.
Happy. Yeah.
So next weekend, I'm going to host an RTT.
Yeah.
And as far as I'm concerned, 9th edition gets released next weekend.
Yeah, sure.
That's what it's because now we're actually out there doing it.
Totally.
And fingers crossed we don't become a super spreader event.
That would be embarrassing.
But yeah, so
yeah.
All right. Well, I think that covers off pretty much the sort of basics of TTS, so that people know where we're at. And so what I want to know is your experience in the tournaments. First, how do they actually manage it? Is it still Swiss pairing style? is it still like how do you find your game and how do you arrange the just all that sort of shit? Someone who's never played a TTS tournament before,
sure.
How does it work?
So there are some different sort of paradigms, but most of them revolve around like pod systems.
Okay.
So essentially, you'll get matched with sort of up to 16 players and play a little RTT, where it's just kind of I actually don't know what Swiss pairings means, but like.
Okay,
essentially,
so Swiss is basically
winners paired against winners.
Yeah, winners paired against winners.
So it'd be Swiss pairings.
Yeah.
And then so when you sort of win your pod, you've won, and then that gives you a certain amount of points that then dictates your eligibility for like these kind of like final tournaments.
Okay.
That then pool the sort of top players from the pools.
Okay.
Sometimes that happens very explicitly. So one of the biggest ones I've been in, which probably would have been. It was like 20-something pods of like 5 players. So like, you know, I think my guess is more than 100 players are playing in this tourney.
Yeah.
Where that was five-man pods, and you all play each other.
Yep.
And then only the winner from each pod goes into like a final kind of RTT, which you then play until the end. So there are a sort of few different ways it works, but almost always it'll be managed on some sort of like software, like BCP is pretty common, a few others as well, and so you'll essentially know your opponent's Discord name, and you'll have and you'll be in the same server. You'll have about a week to organise your game, and then you'll kind of go on to the next game.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what about things like okay, so you're saying like you get paired and then you have a week to play your game.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Which is helpful because most people aren't in Australia, so there's a fair bit of like time zone management.
Yeah,
I've gotten very good at like anticipating time zones. Oh, you're in America. How about 2 p.m. your time on Friday?
And then what about things like TO calls or that's how is that sort of managed?
So I've never actually been in a situation where I've in a like TTS tournament I've had to ask a TO a question. The well organised one. So my favourite of the sort of tournaments is the tactical tortoise tournaments. So these are like pod systems with essentially like 16-ish people, Swiss pairings. And what they have there, and this is true of actually a few of the others, is quite a detailed sort of FAQ document.
Okay, yeah.
So in some ways, and they will make calls, kind of like the ITC did, sort of at different points in 8th, where, GW wasn't kind of, making calls on things, so then the ITC picks it up. And so they sort of have done that.
Yeah.
So it's definitely like worth giving that document a read, and honestly, the document itself clarifies like 90% of things in advance.
Yeah.
So and actually it alters things. Like they do even balance the game in minor ways.
Okay. See, I'm less keen on that. Sure. I'm not a big fan of when TOs change rules. Like if something needs to be changed, I think the correct way to do it is to just play it as is. Yeah. And if it's a problem, GW will get flooded with emails about how bad it is. And
maybe in 6 months' time they'll fix it.
Well, I mean, in theory, if they're doing FAQs 2 weeks after a Codex release, like they should be pretty good. But the problem is if we have tournaments and players changing those sorts of things, because not every tournament is going to change it, and not every player is going to change it, what you end up doing is having tournaments where, so let's say there's some relic that's fucking retarded, right? Yeah. Like old school Ironstone. Sure. Right? Where it's just like, you can make it so that your thing is half damage and -1 damage and just never dies, right? Yeah. If tournaments just independently said, well, we're just not going to have that. We're not going to have that shit, right? Sure, that helps protect your tournament. Yeah. But it doesn't help all the other tournaments and all the other people. And then you get this world where you've actually got two separate metas. You've got a meta where that exists and a meta where it doesn't. Yeah. And that's a problem, Whereas if you let it be a thing, let it be oppressive and ridiculous, that will get everybody on the same side, and then we can actually deal with the problem. Sure. So I'm not a huge fan of when tournaments change. But I mean, they're free to, and some people love it, and some people get really upset if you don't change something that's clearly broken. So to be fair, so the change that I'm thinking of, right, is this is the one that affects me. So I'm mostly playing Eldari. Yeah. Is rules as written,
you measure everything about the actual like transport itself for like Venoms and Starweavers.
Yeah.
So the Harlequin transports and the Drakari transports. Almost everything is measured to the base.
Yeah.
Except when you shoot from them. So because they're open topped, so the passengers can shoot out of them.
Yeah, and they can shoot out of the nose. Yeah.
So you can do these sort of janky things. It's not sort of a rule that's kind of OP per se. It's more that like you can do things like get around character targeting by like moving your base up so that the nose is kind of poking through a gap within an inch of stuff.
Yeah.
And then pick a point that then you're shooting their character from.
Yeah.
So the ruling was everything is measured from the base, including the when you're picking points. So it's not like a nerf as in like the Ironstone where it's like, nah, this effect is reduced by something. It's more like, here's the thing that leads to a bunch of janky situations.
Yeah.
Not necessarily like, ones that are sort of OP, but ones that are just very kind of like counterintuitive.
Yeah.
And that aren't actually even that clear.
Yeah, it's more plugging holes than it is.
That's how I see it.
Yeah, which that's fine.
Yeah.
That's
But yeah, so I kind of do like it, I think.
Yeah.
And maybe it's especially because a lot of the TTS tournaments, because there aren't that many like big tourneys that are run regularly and like continuously, and so there is like a pretty small amount of TOs that are kind of making decisions that affect like a really large number of games. And so for that reason, it's very easy for me to jump into the tactical tortoise tourneys and just sort of learn those rules, learn the quirks that are different to rules as written or whatever, and then just sort of live in that ecosystem for a while.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's sort of TOs making calls in like one-off tourneys, then I totally am with you. Where it's like, there's this janky thing you have to learn.
There's things like this used to happen with the old ETC and ITC. FAQs where you're like, well, hang on, in the way that terrain works in ITC is different to ETC, which is different to GW.
Yeah.
And then you get this situation where if you play nothing but like ETC player pack and ETC FAQs or WTC now, and you start getting used to the way that works, then when you attend an event that doesn't use it, you're going in like you've climatized to that ecosystem. And then when you go into a different one, you get wrecked.
Yeah, sure.
Because you'll be like, oh fuck, I forgot we're playing ITC rules. You can charge through onto the edge of the fucking rooftop or whatever it be. Which is why I think it's really important for everybody to use the same rule set. And I think that rule set should be just straight out of the rule book. And if there's problems, we need to as a community put hard pressure on GW. Fucking fix this.
Sure. So the one thing I'd push back on just a little bit there is that like I think in the cases I know where in 8th there was like a difference between the ITC and the ETC interpretation. Like, I mean, an example of this would be like if you can see a unit and if there's a model within range, but the model itself that's in range is not one you can see. Can you shoot it? And I think the ITC and the ETC ruled in different directions there.
Correct.
But the challenge is that if you sort of tried to just go pure rules as written, it's ambiguous, and that's just the way it is. And so if it's like making a tweak that's against rules as written, I think I'm very sympathetic to what you're saying. But the challenge is, I think there are just a lot of things where, yes, it'd be great if someone at the top just sort of made a call either way. Like the actual answer to that question isn't important. Like one way or another, it's not going to affect games that much. But it's just important we're all on the same page. And so someone does sort of need to step up.
I mean, and there's a reason that TOs exist. There's a reason that rule that role is so important. Because there are so many ambiguous things. Like I was playing a game last night where I was running drop pods, just all my Grimdus and Dreadclaws. Turn 1, I dropped down. And then Stewie, my opponent, killed everything that I had, but I still had drop pods in bullshit. I still had drop pods in space. So I was like, okay, well, I'm not. The game continues, but he's then like, well, hang on, do I get to consolidate? Like, because you have to consolidate towards the closest enemy model, but the enemy models aren't on the table. So it's like, so where can I just consolidate any direction I want, or can I not consolidate at all? Like, and we're just like. These questions, and it's one of those things where it's like these questions aren't going to pop up often because not many people are retarded enough to bring a complete drop pod up.
Totally random.
Like that's just like why, but for fun. That's why.
Yeah.
But because of that, you're going to get situations that aren't explored and they aren't as broad enough to justify GW actually investigating it. So you do need a TO that's able to make those sorts of calls.
Yeah.
So yeah, by no means am I saying TOs should just never change things and never make clarifications. I just worry when they see something that's it's a specific way and it's clear as day that rules as written, this is exactly how it works, and then they go, yeah, but that leads to abuse. Yeah. So then they amend it.
Yeah, sure.
That's my concern.
Yeah.
What about things like, for example, if you see your opponent do something dodgy during a game?
Yeah. So again, I haven't had any problems with that. So the majority of my opponents have been lovely, and even those who I haven't really liked very much have not really tried to cheat me.
Yeah.
But there is, I think, the newest, say, Tactical Tortoise tournament. It's a bit of a alliteration.
TTST, Tactical Tortoise Tabletop
Simulator tournament series.
TTT.
Yeah.
STTS.
So it's actually they actually call it T5S2.
Oh really?
That's because there's 5 T's and 2 S's.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
See, that's better. That's easy.
Yeah. So in T5S2, apparently in the new edition, I think it's that. Maybe it's one of the other ones I'm thinking of, but they are about to introduce a card system.
Yep.
So that the TO can issue yellow cards, but I'm not actually sure how that's resolved at the moment. But it hasn't come up for me. I mean, as I say, these are very keen players.
Well, it's one of the things that I find that surprising, because I would have thought that one of the things that keeps people honest on the game is that they're making eye contact with the person that they're playing. They're talking to that person. They've got body language. All of those things are involved. But when you're playing against a no-name, faceless person online, I feel like that would the types of people that would try to grab that extra inch and cheat here and say they rolled a 6 when they actually rolled a fucking 4 or whatever, and they've deleted the dice before you had a chance to look at it, that sort of stuff. I would have thought that something like Tabletop Simulator would bring out the worst in those types of people.
Yeah.
But maybe those types of people just aren't even playing Tabletop Simulator.
I could definitely see how that argument could work, but I guess speaking to just my anecdotal experience, I reckon the average opponent quality in terms of just interpersonal stuff on TTS is at least as high, if not higher, than my experience of tournaments in real life.
Okay.
And I don't know exactly why that is.
Well, maybe it's got a reverse effect, because you can't see the person and because you're not in their presence. They can't intimidate you.
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe that's a thing. Their physical presence, they can't. They can't be off-putting. They can't
bully you.
Yeah. So that gives people the freedom to just be comfortable.
Yeah. If I had to guess, I would say it's just that the kinds of people who are on TTS are those who are really keen about the game of Warhammer.
Yeah.
And because especially because because it's a sort of a less rich experience than the actual tabletop. If you win a tournament, you don't generally win prize money.
Yeah.
You don't even really win respect, because you're just a username.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas, in a real tournament in real life, you often win prize money.
Yeah. You go up to receive your trophy,
heft you on their shoulders, and everyone's like, "Yay, Dean!"
Yeah. Except for the last 3 events I won, I got booed because I was running town. Everyone's like, in first place it's Dean, and I'm like, and everyone's like, boo!
It's like your own tournament.
It's literally my own fucking tournament.
So I reckon it's because. So again, if I had to guess, your theory seems interesting, but if I had to guess, it'd be that the people who are there to sort of for the glory or for the the money or whatever are just not attracted to TTS because there's no glory or money in it.
Yeah. So that is good. And then you also find physical tournaments, because people bring physical models. Certain people will bring their really beautifully painted army, and they'll just be absolute fucking snobs. And they'll look down at your stuff and be like, ugh. And then you're like, okay, now I don't fucking like this guy. And then you already start off on the wrong foot, Whereas on TTS, it's like, well, I love the way you copy and pasted your army. Like,
nice Control-C, Control-V, very fast.
I like it.
Dexterous fingers.
So there's less. Yeah. There's less like maybe elitism, I guess. And then you also get people that are like, they worry that 40Ks are like a pay-to-win sort of thing, where it's like, if a new codex comes out and it's got sick units, if you can get in and buy and build those models before they get FAQ'd to crap, you know, they put you at a huge advantage.
Sure.
That a lot of people get salty about that. They look at it and go, oh, you know, whatever. Whereas that's probably not a problem on TTS, because everybody has equal opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's definitely some interesting stuff there. So tell us a bit about the sorts of armies that you see on TTS.
Yeah, so I got a bit nerdy here. I sort of...
You got nerdy on a Warhammer podcast. How dare you?
Yeah, so I really like writing code and mucking around with stats.
Yep.
So essentially what I decided to do, because I was interested, I've been following a lot of the discussions around like sort of the meta in general.
Yep.
And like, I guess it's a really interesting period to be having these conversations, because we're getting a very low volume of games sort of relative to what we had sort of, you know, pre-pandemic and and there's also there's sort of certain ways in which like events are very localized. Certain places are open, other places aren't.
Yeah.
And so all of these things probably have like a pretty big impact, and maybe also a lot of people have hobby time too. But what I did is just to sort of isolate, and so a lot of those. Sorry, this is a bit of a long-winded introduction, preamble. But the people who are looking at stats. So this is like the guys on the 40K Stat Center podcast. Peter the Falcon being sort of the main driving force there. They are often looking at like including in their data sets tabletop simulator tournaments.
Yeah.
Especially those that are run on BCP. A lot of them are run not on BCP, and I wouldn't be surprised if they're not getting that data. But this is sort of, you know, finding its way into the sort of, you know, general meta stats, I guess. But what I did personally is I went through all of the Tactical Tortoise pods. These are run through BCP, so it will be these should be show up at least as, you know, partly in the sort of broad data.
Yep.
Plus a few other tournaments that weren't, like the Pro Tabletop TTS tournament and the one called Alpha League, which is the biggest one. That's the one where you like have the small pods and then the winners all play this larger one. And basically, the factions that are winning are not dissimilar from the meta at large. So you've got Space Marines, the largest. So this is armies that are top 4 placing in pods or in tourneys.
Yep.
So Space Marines are the largest represented faction, and we can drill down into the chapters if you're interested. Harlequins are the second most.
Okay, which is interesting.
Yeah, very like different from what anyone would have guessed, I suppose, because.
Well, I know when
I
remember when 9 first came out and everyone was like, oh my god, Harleys are busted because they didn't get as many points increases as everybody else and various things. So.
But they also said that about Custodes, right?
Yeah, they did.
And what seems to have happened is that for whatever reason, Harlequins are being played really... Or actually, they're being played similarly often to Custodes, but they seem to be top 4ing more often than Custodes.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I tried to write a few different Custody lists. When I first got it, I was like, oh my god, I can just write a Custodes list and I can just play that.
Yeah.
You know, so I don't own any Custodes models, but I can play with it.
Yeah.
And I wrote a few lists, but every single time I wrote a list, I was like, yeah, sure, they're not as expensive as they could have been, and but I was like, but you still end up with like 2,000 points and you got 20 models in your army.
Sure.
Like, it still just kind of feels bad.
Yeah. So I actually bought a Custodes army. I mean, to be fair, it was like $400.
Yeah.
For like, you know, all of the models I could possibly ever use that are not Forge World.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a big investment or anything, but I've heard, as people have analysed this, I'm not sure how seriously to take some of this. It's a bit speculative, but my understanding is that they don't play very well into Marines. And that's a huge thing. Yeah. Because Marines is just such a big part of the field.
Yeah.
If you can't, you know, at least go toe-to-toe with Marines, you're going to have a very hard time doing better than like 4-1.
Yeah.
Just because that's a matchup you're going to be put into for sure.
Yeah.
Whereas Harlequins, like I don't know if they're better than Custodes. I guess a lot of people would say they are, but what they do have going for them is that I think they play into Marines pretty well. They have a lot of tools, they have a lot of jank, and the sorts of things that are good against them are not very good against Marines as well. Like bringing a whole bunch of high rate of fire, no AP weapons. It's like that just mows. They just completely blast through Harlequins. But Marines in cover it does nothing to, right? So Space Marines, Harlequins, AdMech is our third most highly sort of top 4ing army. Then Necrons and then Sisters. So that's our top 5.
I actually would have predicted most of those. I would have predicted Necrons, I would have predicted Sisters, Harleys, and Space Marines. I wouldn't have predicted the AdMech though. Because maybe that's just because I don't know anyone who plays it. So I haven't got somebody sitting in my ear going, "Oh my god, this is a fucking sick thing!" And to be honest, I haven't been paying as much attention online as historically I have. So I just haven't heard what's good with AdMech.
So I myself am a lot more like motivated to pay attention because I am playing in these tourneys. Whereas if you're kind of waiting for the world to return back to normal, I can totally see how, and maybe this is what you're feeling. Like you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like it feels a bit premature to sort of pay a lot of attention to the meta for it to just change in another month anyway.
Well, that's the thing. Is
before you even get to play games. So.
The rate in which the meta is evolving and adapting. It's like, sure, Harleys could be really good right now, but literally next month they might bring out the Eldar Codex and everyone's going to be like, fuck Harleys.
There's 12 shots.
Exactly. Like, they could change it at any given time. So it's like, if I'm attending a tournament next weekend, then hell yeah, I want to know what's going to be good and I want to know what's going to be there. But if I'm not planning on attending any big tournaments till next year, well, I'll start paying attention next year.
Yeah, for sure.
Sort of. That's been where I've been at.
So one little caveat with this data. So I'm not dividing this by the number of actual people playing these factions. So this is not like a measure of like how good the faction is on average. It's a measure of purely just counts of how many people who are top 4 and are playing these factions.
So you might have, say you've got 1,000 players in there. You might have 4 Space Marine players and all 4 of them top forward.
Exactly.
So, or you might, and then of the Harlequins, you might have 50 Harlequin players and 3 of them top 3 are top forward. So it's interesting.
One way of kind of getting around that. Now, I don't have the data to do that because I don't have like access to the sort of best coast pairings like API. But Peter the Falcon at 40k Stat Center does. And he and Val Heffelfinger, his co-host, have sort of come up with this metric called TWIP. So it stands for I think it's tournaments in winning position. Is that right? What it stands for? Something like that.
Tournaments. I just saw it. Tournaments in winning position.
Tournaments in winning position. There you go. So what they do, or at least this is a TWIP ratio. So it's sort of a measure of how likely a faction is to top 4 divided by the number of people playing that faction. So what we get there, and this is their data, which includes both a lot of these TTS tournaments that I'm looking at. And also a lot of live events too. They have their sort of top 10, say, all of which are sort of overrepresented. The best way to think of it would be like overrepresented in the top 4 relative to how many people are playing them. Salamanders, Harlequins, Chaos Demons, Sisters of Battle Orcs, AdMech, GSC, interestingly enough, Raven Guard, White Scars, and Space Wolves.
Didn't expect to see my old boys the Raven Guard in there.
No.
I thought a lot of their tricks have just become like universalized, and that means that they're no longer the premium choice because you can be salamanders, have your cake and eat it too.
So a few more caveats. It's not always entirely clear where this data is like starting and ending. And so like with the data I was talking about, like one of the things you said is like I'm like Necrons, of course I would have predicted they'd be there. But some of those pods were started before the actual Necron book came out. So there's sort of a lot of things that are kind of not really exactly certain, such as like what factions are in what position rules-wise when these data are being recorded.
Yeah.
Because there's a trade-off, right? It's like we could go from just the freshest data, but then we have a very small sample size.
Yeah. Which, as 40k grows, and one of the Tabletop Simulator actually helps this, is as it grows you get a bigger sample size, which you're then able to go take a shorter time period because you get more games within that time period.
Sure.
Whereas the less people playing, the bigger the time period you need to make in order to get that
all
sample.
those games.
So,
for sure.
So that's a positive thing for the future. But where we're currently at, I think we're still in a situation where it's hard to get accurate data.
And we're about to open up as Victorians and maybe as Australians, but it seems like Europe and the US are like, they're about to start clamping down with respect to like, in real life events. So it's a weird time.
And that's actually why I think that this podcast is like perfectly timed.
Yeah.
Because a large portion of the world are about to go back into lockdown, so they're going to go back onto Tabletop Simulator.
Yeah.
And people like yourself who've been playing TTS consistently for pretty much since lockdown started, you've been able to help work out some of the kinks, I think, and work out some of the workarounds and the challenges of it, so that when the rest of the world eventually jumps on, they're not playing like TTS V1.
Yeah.
They're playing, a more refined. The tables are refined. The scoring system's refined, and all of those things. So I think when people actually take the time to jump on it now, they'll be pleasantly surprised.
This is potentially a little tiny bit off topic, but so in my like sort of quote unquote day job, I do a lot of like writing code.
Yeah.
And one of the things I find super beautiful about humanity, like whenever I'm getting down, whenever I'm depressed, one of the things that makes me happy is just how amazing the sort of community of people in like coding and software development are in terms of creating things for others to use for free.
Yep.
So like open source products.
Yeah.
And TTS is really like that. There are all of these like tools and plugins and maps and there's sort of this ecosystem has developed around a certain kind of paradigm of table.
Yeah.
Where some people make terrain and they make it so it's compatible with the tables.
Yeah.
Other people make, sort of do 3D scans of models. And then yet others do other things like there's this an app I would love to plug called Battlescribe to TTS.
Yeah.
Where essentially it allows you to take a Battlescribe list, upload it just into a web browser. You get a code, you copy that into TTS, and you tell the app what the models are that correspond to the different units in your Battlescribe list.
And that fills out their profile and stuff.
It fills out their profile. It has all this like pretty sophisticated scripting where it lets you do things like create auras and color code units.
Yeah.
And it's just some person just thought this would be cool.
There's so many layers to that because Battlescribe itself is like that. It's like it's a free download on your phone. And now you got, or on your PC, and now you've got that, and then you've also got people creating the data repositories and stuff, so that's all done free as well. Free,
exactly.
And then somebody's created Tabletop Simulator itself, which is, it's not free, it's a game that you have to buy, but once you buy it, you go, okay, I can download all of the models for free, and I can download the maps for free, and then somebody else has then created an app that allows Battlescribe to communicate. It's like, and all of this is just fucking free.
Yeah, just because people are passionate and they want to make their lives and others' lives easier.
And I think
I just love it.
It's like even this podcast, it's going to be absolutely free for the entire duration of it.
Yeah.
I'm never planning to charge for this, and I have so many people that think you're insane. You've got such a huge following. And you're providing such a valuable thing, like, why not have a paywall? Like, they get the first half of the episode for free and then the other half they pay for. Or have some kind of Patreon support, or have some kind of, monetization. But I'm like, on YouTube, I don't even tick the monetize.
Yeah.
I don't want 14 cents for every fucking 10,000 views. Like, I don't give a shit. Yeah. I just want to create. That's all I want to do.
Yeah.
And I don't care what happens with it once it's created, as long as I'm creating things and providing and,
Yeah. No, I'm with you, man.
And I think that's just, and this is obviously a massive segue, but we'll get back into Tabletop Simulator in a sec. But I think it's a human nature thing where it's like an evolutionary imperative to create. Because if you create a shelter, that allows you and your family to succeed and reproduce.
Social status, all of this stuff, right?
So there's an evolutionary advantage to constructing and building. And I think that, tens of thousands or however long later, that's why we go, I want to build and paint a fucking billion models. Like, sure. I get a satisfaction out of that, and I think that satisfaction is tapping into that whole creating is just always good.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that's why people go, I'm going to create all of this Tabletop Simulator stuff for people to just use.
Yeah.
Like, the reward is creating it,
yeah.
not what you would get for creating it.
Yeah,
so,
sure.
Yeah, it was an interesting little tangent that we went on, but I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we've talked about the top factions that we're seeing represented.
Yeah.
We've talked a bit about...
Just one quick note there on interpretation is I wouldn't want to say that any of these lists are like definitely the best faction, or that like the fact that Salamanders are 2.6 T-Whip ratio versus Harlequins 2.36 means that like Salamanders are better. There's so much like noise and bias in all of these things.
Yeah, because you might have top players that are playing Salamanders, and you might have, you know, like lesser experienced or less skilled players playing a different faction,
100%.
And therefore that faction's T-Whip is going to be trash.
Yeah,
but it's not. That's not a statement of the quality of the faction. There's all like
whose first army is Harlequins?
Yeah, exactly.
Whose first army is Chaos Demons?
And that's one of the reasons that like things like AdMech, because it's actually a relatively new faction.
Yeah,
it's one of the newest factions that there is. It doesn't have that same cult following. You know, whereas like I've been playing Chaos for 15 fucking years, right? So, and there's tons of people out there that are in that same boat. So it's like there's tons of Chaos players out there. There's not many AdMech players because it's a newer thing. And the people that are playing AdMech, often they're not the 15-year veterans. You know, they're the people who've just got into 40k last year because you know, blah blah blah, and then you know, so they're not going to be the types of people that are going to be dominating events.
Exactly.
But that doesn't mean that the Codex doesn't have the potential to do that.
Oh, definitely not. So yeah, so I think that's really worth emphasising is that like I mean, in that list, Grey Knights didn't appear, but I like I guess, you know, maybe I'm just wrong, but I reckon Grey Knights are like better than half those factions.
Yeah.
So there's another one, like last little meta thing, which is completely qualitative. So all of these things are purely based on data. All of the stuff I've talked about is purely based on data, with all of the pros and cons that comes with that.
Yeah.
There's no sort of opinions involved, but on the other hand, if there's a bias somewhere, like just a really good Salamanders player who just dominates, even though the book's underpowered, then that sort of skews things. But the Art of War guys, so this is sort of Nick Nanavati, John Lennon, Richard Siegler, and is it Mike Perry?
You tell me.
That's right. So basically, they're four very, very accomplished like players who just live in a share house together.
Yeah.
You know, three of them.
That's the dream.
Two of them. So Lennon and Siegler were you know 1 and 4 at Nova. At the Las Vegas Open at the start of the year, and I think they were also 1 and 3 in the ITC.
Yeah.
So you know, very, very good players. They came up with their own meta list, which is pretty much purely qualitative. So this is just their own sense of how things are going.
Yeah. Okay.
Based on their appraisal of you know, faction strength, and their sort of S tier list. And you know, I'm sure this has sort of been updated because when this came out, the codexes hadn't had long to settle.
Yeah.
Their S tier list was Sisters, Space Marines, Dark Angels, and Blood Angels. And their A list was AdMech, Harlequins, Death Guard, Grey Knights, Demons, Custodes, Space Wolves, Necrons. And where Necrons had a huge asterisk because the Codex had just come out.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think there's a lot to that sort of qualitative analysis, given.
Yeah. Well, there's one thing if you can't just take the data and just accept it on face value. What you need somebody who's deeply embedded in the community, who understands the way to analyze and interpret data, and then can communicate that out. You can't just look at the numbers and be like, oh, numbers are X, therefore Y.
For sure.
That's a problem that a lot of people have.
Definitely.
And that's one of the things where a lot of people fall into the trap of, you know, Googling what's fucking awesome, and then they go, oh, this is fucking awesome, and then they run it, and it's like, well, if you don't understand why that's awesome, just running it is going to be a problem.
Definitely.
And if you don't understand why your faction has a 2.6, you know, T-Whip, you just run it because the man on the computer said good, you know.
For sure. So
you're gonna end up underperforming.
Definitely. So those stats guys are very aware of these kinds of caveats. Like, you know, so I'm not, like, I wouldn't want this to sort of seem like I'm accusing, like, you know, Peter, for example, of being unaware of this.
Oh,
of course,
absolutely, yeah. I'm more just looking for the people. There's a lot of people out there that will just listen to 40k Stat Center, and they might not have an understanding of the way that works, and therefore they fall into that trap.
I reckon, like, again, this is just my total hunch, quite speculative. I wouldn't want to attach a very high, like, confidence to this opinion, but I reckon that's why, say, Grey Knights are played less than they are.
Yeah.
Because there's sort of been this hype around Custodes Harlequins at the start.
Yeah.
Most of which was kind of speculative. Some of it was kind of borne out a little bit in the results.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just think that, like, because of this kind of extent to which people are hearing things are good and then playing those things insofar as they have multiple factions and the flexibility, you end up getting this very kind of this kind of bubbly meta, I guess.
Yeah. I think also you see things like Grey Knights, for example, they had a very specific archetype in the tail end of 8th, and that archetype doesn't work in 9th.
Yeah.
It's just bad. So people go, oh, the whole faction's in the bin.
Yeah.
But they're not actually going, well, hang on, let's just take another fresh, open-eyed look at that faction and be like, well, hang on, what about running these different things that if you had run that list in 8th, everyone would laugh at you.
Yeah.
But now you can run a completely different Grey Knights list that's never really existed before, and it's actually really good. So until people start actually doing different things with a faction and actually exploring it, you're not going to see it pop up in the stats.
Yeah, for sure.
That's actually an interesting segue. So, like, from 8th to 9th, obviously there was a lot of big rules changes. There was blasts, there was vehicles shooting into combat, there was coherency, there was the way charges changed, you know, there's so many massive changes. A lot of people think, oh, 9th is just like 8.5, and it's like, no, absolutely not. It's a completely different fucking edition. How have you seen, what archetypes, I guess, have you seen common in Tabletop Simulator tournaments?
Yeah, so I can definitely speak to the transition. So, end of 8th, I thought that gun lines were quite strong, especially gun lines supplemented with countercharge. With few exceptions, gun lines are, like, pretty much dead.
Okay.
So I've never seen Tau perform well with any sort of gunline style. AdMech kind of do it, but they sort of only pull it off because they have such good, like, countercharge units to supplement.
Yeah.
And, like, scouting units, harassing units. So that will be one big thing, is, like, moving away from doing damage.
Yeah.
Maybe partly because everything's so high damage anyway. To moving towards things that are fast. And able to, like, move block, and especially, and maybe this is where sort of Harlequins come in specifically, so I'm mostly a Harlequins player, is being able to sort of take fast obsec to deny the primary without losing too much.
Well, that's one of the things, like, obviously the missions in 9th is probably, even though I just rattled off like 10 different changes in the rules, the biggest change is actually just the missions.
I agree.
And the way that the primary is going to dictate pretty much the whole game, because the vast majority of your points are scored there, and every point that you score there is a point that you can take from your opponent, well, not every point, but a lot of them.
Like, almost any competitive list should be able to get, 20 minimum of secondaries. And, like, probably ideally 30 comfortably.
But there's going to be very few lists that get no secondaries, and there's going to be very few lists that max
a well-built list, exactly.
So you're probably going to get, most people are going to probably get 20 to 30. So there's really only
that's only
5 to 10 points
primary,
of difference, whereas that's exactly one turn of primary can be like, well, that was everything.
All of that difference in secondary is kind of made up. 100%. So I think playing the primary is very important. I mean, this is not news, but the sorts of lists that play out well, I think, are pretty different. Like, so what I think of as the sort of strongest lists in the game tend to be, and again, there's a fair bit of sort of me interpreting this. Like, other people, better players than me will have different takes, but it's about, like, having units that are, like, efficient in all phases. especially like in shooting and close combat.
Yeah.
And units that are good at just harassing. So either like removing them off an objective and taking it, or just being able to tow on and just deny an objective by virtue of being OBSEC and overpowered.
Yeah, I think one of the real big ones is the fact that if somebody's on an objective, you can shoot them off, that's fine, but that doesn't get you the objective.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's where combat is really, really good in this edition, because if you can punch them off the objective, well, not only have you taken it off them, but now you have it.
Yeah, and they have to deal with you.
Yeah,
exactly.
And then if they want to deal with you, they want to punch on with you. So really strong combat units do that really well. But then you need to be able to be fast in order to do that.
Yeah. And
there's I think fast combat lists are good in these missions. Is that something that you see consistent throughout different factions?
Good question. So Space Marines, yes. I mean, again, smart and like competent players will disagree about this, but I think that White Scars are at least in the top sort of 3 Space Marine sub-factions.
Yep.
And that's what they do.
Their advance and charge.
Advance and charge, fall back and charge is also really strong.
Yeah.
The ability to like fall back and shoot as well for CP works for units like Plasma Inceptors. So John Lennon, so this is the guy who topped the ITC last year for Space Marines, and I think came 3rd overall. He thinks White Scars are the strongest army in the game, I think.
Okay. Yep.
And that's very much that archetype. It's durable. It's a lot of 2 wound, 3 up saves, 2 up saves in cover.
Yeah.
That are sort of quite fast for advance and charge, moving up the board, and kind of being able to sort of bully you off objectives, but being fast enough to kind of poke out and just take something that's sort of off in the side as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's definitely true of Space Marines. Harlequins for sure.
Yep. And then AdMech, like you said, they've got good shooting capacity, but they've also got lots of what are the Dragoon guys that are those fast chicken walker dudes?
The things I see most are Electro Priests, because they have they have a rule where if they kill something in the fight phase, I think it's only even a model, it might not even be a unit. They get a permanent 3-up invuln.
Okay.
And then if they're on an objective, I think it costs them a CP, but they can take that to a 2-up invuln. Wow. So they're not OBSEC. But if you run a unit of 10 and you move them out of their transport, I think they have a strat to advance and charge, I'm not 100% sure about that. But if they move out of their transport and they charge something and kill it off an objective, you spend that CP and now they're sitting on that with a 2-up invulnerable save.
Yeah.
And the ability to fight into almost anything. Like, you don't want to charge that, So even AdMech have this sort of the tools to play this kind of game.
Yeah.
What else is doing well? Let's have a look at our faction list.
Yeah, so we had Necrons, obviously. I think Necrons are one of the most busted, ridiculous lists.
I agree.
Toying with a list of 120 warriors, and it's just
scary.
It's just like, if somebody rocks up with that, it's just like, I can't be fucked.
Yeah.
Like, you kill 10, 3 get back up, you kill another 10, another 3 get back up, and you're like, oh, well, I should have killed the squad, but there's still 6 guys there. You're like, what the fuck? And
they're not a sort of close combat, like warriors aren't a close combat unit.
Yeah.
But there are ways, so I know people are sometimes running the close combat dynasty.
Yes.
It gives them the, I think, +1 attack strat.
Yeah, and they get like +1 AP and strength or something in combat.
Something like that, and so I've played against a list that was the dynasty was -1 toughness to anyone within an inch.
Yeah.
So he's wounding my Harleys on 2s. My Will Be Done works in combat, so he's hitting me on 2s as well.
Yeah.
So they have not necessarily like come in and do damage.
Yeah, they're not going to pull down a knight in combat. But
definitely not. But they could definitely come in, wrap your stuff, and just sit on that objective and not move.
Yeah.
Because you can fight them, but they just keep reanimating. And
then on top of that, there was one of the dynasties is each OBSEC model counts as 2 models.
Yeah.
And it's like, so you put a 20-man blob on an objective, and it's like, good luck.
Yeah, for sure. It's so much investment to move that.
Yeah. Exactly. Like, I've played a game where I've got Charybdis with 20 Noise Marines in it.
You might need to explain what a Charybdis is.
Okay, that's actually true. There will be people who know.
4-12 January.
The Crybwood, it's a big 20 transport capacity 4-12 drop pod for Chaos. So it comes down, all the Noise Marines jump out, then you have a sorcerer who puts prescience on them, so they're hitting on 2s.
Yeah.
And then they've got Veterans of the Long War, so they're wounding things on 2s generally, like Necrons on 2s.
Terrifying.
And then they've got a strat that makes them Strength 5, 2 damage.
Yeah.
And they just go fucking a billion shots. The unit puts out 60 shots and it can shoot twice, so it's 120 shots. And it's a 1,000-point investment for that one bomb. So it's bad. Like, it's amazingly powerful, but it's bad. So
probably like 1,000 points are probably like half your CP as well. Right?
Yeah, it's almost all of your CP gone. But it's just fun. So I'm like, yep. And I'm bringing this thing just so that I can just big dick it. And then boom, here's a crew, just deal with it.
Yeah.
But against Necrons, we ran the numbers. You drop it down, you spend all your CP, you shoot twice, and you actually don't even kill the unit 20. Yeah. Like, you might, but not consistently. And if you don't, if you kill it down to that one man left and he goes, and then just, like, heartbreaking when you've just thrown 1,000 points at one 20-man bomb and he can have 6 20-man bombs. It's like, how even, like, I've just created 1,000-point list that has the unit that has the highest possible damage output that I can make, you know, and it's not enough.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's like, okay, well, maybe you need to play the mission, maybe you need to but you can't play the mission against something that has effectively 40 obsec bodies.
Yeah.
Like,
it's hard,
You can't just be like, oh, instead of killing them, just try and outscore them, because they're going to be like, nah.
So I've only played new Necrons once myself.
Yeah.
And it was against the guy who ended up winning the, like, pod that I was playing in at the time.
Yeah.
So effectively you could think of it like an RTT. And he didn't even have that many Necron warriors.
Yeah.
But they were the thing that won in the game for sure.
Yeah.
I just had, like, you know, I think I got maybe a little bit unlucky on one turn and, you know, left him with 2 guys left. And it's just like, my barge just generates another D3, and then I'll just, like, resorb another D6.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so you went from me almost killing this unit. It's like that threshold of, like, if I killed it, none of this is a problem.
Yeah.
But because I didn't, it's like all of this stuff comes back. And,
and the problem there is it sort of begs the sunken cost fallacy, where you go, I've shot so much into it, and if I don't do anything, it's all going to come back. So you're like, I actually need to keep wasting shit on this. When in reality, I don't want to fire my las cannons at that squad of warriors. I want to be shooting them at, like, the Silent King.
Yeah.
But I actually need to kill that unit of warriors.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
At that point, you sort of do have to.
It means it puts you in situations where you have to make inefficient choices with damage, for sure. So definitely them. Orcs I haven't actually played against. I haven't even seen them really in any of the TTS tournaments.
Yeah.
Could be partly because they're at least generally a horde army, and that's very awkward on TTS.
Well, I would have thought Meganobs might have a place in the way that they're a tough, punchy unit that also puts out decent DACA.
Yeah.
And they're also just tough as fuck when they, especially if you get them in cover and that gives them that 1-up save. Like, Meganobs could have a place.
Yeah, I'm not sure they could well, but their T-whip ratio is good, but I as I say haven't played them, so I don't know that well.
Yeah. What about GSC? I see they're on there.
Yeah, so I have definitely played GSC, and they are very hard for Harlequins. They're they're a tricky matchup for us, and they are absolutely like that. So at least the archetypes that I've played against are very much designed around denying the primary. So and they have a lot of tools for it, because they can deep strike within 3, or they can deep strike normally and then move 6 inches. D6 inches as well. So unless you're, and Grey Knights also have this strat as well, so unless you're really sitting around the centre of the objective, they can come in with OBSEC that just deep strikes, spend a couple of CP and just take that objective off you. And then almost all of the stuff they have that deals damage does so on the charge, or by getting in close in the case of hand flamers, and is OBSEC. So acolytes. So I think they definitely play this way. The GSA lists that are good aren't gun lines of Lemon Rust tanks. It's pulling up 5-man squads that just completely cuck you off objectives. So definitely them. Sisters we haven't talked about, but the scariest sisters list I played are Repentia.
Yes.
And again, they're sort of just a unit that are reasonably durable, especially against a lot of things that are popular. And they get up in your face, just kill anything. A lot of sort of mobile things like Zephyrim. A lot of stuff that deep strikes.
I was deeply offended. I watched a mate Sam play Sisters the other day, and he had that ruin that you can buy.
Yeah, okay.
And it's this massive fucking thing.
So it gives them CP or something?
I'm not 100% sure on all of its rules, but the bit that offended me is it was 55 points, and it's a line of sight blocking piece of terrain that you can build into your list and then deploy where you want it. It's like, get fucked. So you're just saying, oh, there's an objective here, I'm just going to put my wall in front of it and then put my guys on it. It's like, you can essentially choose where the terrain goes in your deployment zone. That's insane, and it's only 50 fucking points. Yeah.
It's just like we all have had times where we've just made a list and have that left over.
Yeah, it's like the amount of times that you've been like, how am I going to spend these last 50 points? Yeah. If you said to me that I could put a 50 point, like I'm a corn army running at you, but I still would love to be able to put some line of sight blocking terrain.
Hold your backfield, give some shelter to something.
And the amount of times that you'll lose games because you'll rock up to the table and you'll be like, wow, I actually can't hide. If they go first, they're just going to alpha on me and kill everything. And then they go first and they're alpha on me, and you're just like, yeah, that was just unfortunate terrain.
Yeah, sure.
Being able to spend 50 points to make that no longer a fucking threat, so ridiculous.
Yeah. So I don't actually know how that model works. But if that is indeed the way it works, it's obscuring and all of that stuff.
Yeah, it's a ruin with obscuring, scalable, breachable, defensible.
Sure. Yeah.
It's like
50 points.
For 50 points.
Sure. Can you put stuff inside?
What do you like?
Can you? It's like a terrain piece. It's not like a building. So.
It's a terrain piece. Yeah. So it doesn't have like a transport capacity or anything like that. It's just a terrain piece.
Yeah.
But you can take a detachment with 3 of them.
Yeah. Just build your own defense line.
So you just go, oh yeah, cool. See this objective here? I'm just going to build a freaking brick around it, and that's my objective forever. There's one sister in there. Good luck to you. You know. And like. Yeah, I was deeply offended by that. I was like, I don't even care. The rest of the codex could be garbage,
which it's not.
And then the way he was using the miracle dice, I was just like, this is fucking bullshit. Like being able to just go, oh, I'm just going to auto pass every charge I need to make ever. Yeah. Like as a Chaos Slayer, the amount of times that I've failed charges, even when I had the blood letters with a 3d6 plus 1.
Yeah.
It's like,
and they can make like 11-inch charges guaranteed. Yeah. If they have a 6 and a 5, right?
And especially with. The reason that's so important is that with 9th edition, you have to make it into every unit that you declare against. So previously, I would go, cool, I'm just going to charge this one unit that's 9 inches away with my 3d6 plus 1, and then I'm going to fucking tag like everyone.
Yeah, and fight twice and kill it.
Yeah, exactly. You declare against all of them.
Yeah.
You declare against everything. I would often say, okay, I'm going to declare a charge, and I would just say everything within 12 inches.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even point at you. I just say everything within 12 inches is what I'm charging.
Yeah, for sure.
But now you can't do that. You literally go everything within 9 inches.
Yeah. So sisters are in this very unique place where if they know their miracle dice and they know that there's that, there's the thing they want to charge 5 away, but there's a juicy looking character, 11 away, that would also be pretty nice to fight into. Yeah. They don't have to make that choice and be like, oh,
there's no risk. There's 0 risk.
Yeah, it's just like, burn a 6 and a 5 and that's a dead character.
Yeah.
It's really nice.
That ability to just completely ignore the chances of failing that charge is one of the most busted things in the game.
Yeah.
Can they kill 20 warriors off an objective though?
Can they get a adventure? We can run the math, but yes. It's my strong hunch.
Yeah.
And that's a whole bunch of girls, an absurd amount of attacks hitting on 4s with 4 rerolls, and then strength 6 or winning on 3s, and then they get a save. Or they do get a 6 up.
But yeah, so based on just the miracle dice, the Repentia style attacking damage, and that bloody terrain piece, it does not surprise me at all that the sisters are in that top thing.
I think they're really strong. I like them a lot. They seem fun to play too.
Yeah.
They have a lot of maybe partly miracle dice give you a lot of sort of interesting little moments that pop up where it's hey, I can just use a miracle dice to do that thing. And I think if I wasn't so invested in Eldari, I think I'd strongly consider maybe Sisters.
I suspect that either when Sisters get their new codex, or possibly even in an FAQ, I suspect that Miracle Dice will be changing the same way that the command reroll stratagem changed.
Sure. To a limited number of things.
Yeah, they'll change it to you can use your Miracle Dice as a saving throw, as a this or a that.
Yeah.
not just like chaplain litany or just reroll it, or those sorts of things. They'll limit what you can use it for, because like people used to use the Celestines just get back up thing. Yeah, they just miracle dice it.
Yeah. I think they still can.
They still can. Yeah. They can't CP it though. Yeah, is the point.
I see. Yeah.
Whereas they used to be able to,
Yeah, sure. No, you're probably right. I
think that's the future. I think that's where that's going to go.
The meta is going to be very different once books arrive. Yeah. And I'm kind of enjoying the sort of Wild West of like everything just being completely weird and unbalanced. Yeah. Certain things being like ludicrously undercosted and other things being just insane. And it's a bit like, it can make you a bit salty if you want to play that unit or that faction that just doesn't have that many good options. Yeah. But it's pretty kind of just a bit wild and zany, and I like that.
The one that sort of just makes me disappointed is when you have something that's good, you invest in it, you buy it, you build it, you paint it, and then it gets FAQ'd into oblivion, and you're like,
all those people who bought Wolfen at the start of 9.
It's just like for you. It's just like I've got a shelf here full of Centurions and Aggressors, and I'm like,
well, that's kind of like.
And I got a shelf.
I have zero sympathy for people who have
I suspect the comments are going to be just full of "fuck you" and your Centurions.
Exactly.
But like, I got a shelf full of Scouts.
I could not be happier that they got hammered.
Yeah, I think Scouts was unnecessary though.
Yeah, it was a bit hard.
Like, I get that they want to try and push Marines, and it was always frustrating when you go against a Marine list, and you're like, literally, they've got Centurions and Scouts. There's no actual Space Marines in the list. Like the core of the army just isn't represented.
It's not very thematic.
Yeah. So I totally understand that. I just feel that, like, they could have, if you want to get Scouts into an Elite's role, and you want to, give them something that makes them elite. Yeah.
Or I feel like maybe fast attack makes more sense, right?
Yeah.
Why not make fast attack?
Maybe fast attack would have made plenty more sense.
Yeah, it sort of has more like, you don't think of like the trainee as like elite in any way, right? He's just a dude with less good armor who's like, hopefully one day going to make it.
Exactly. They're like the elite fights. Yeah, they're the opposite of elite. They're like,
but they do forward deploy, so that's kind of fast.
Yeah. So what about things that, like, touching on Scouts, what about things like, are you seeing a lot of infiltrating style? Are you finding that big on Tabletop Simulator tournaments?
I played against one I think pretty new player who was playing Raven Guard, who like just went absolutely ham on the infiltration and just happened to like sort of be lucky, got first turn, and it would have been like, it was a terrible deployment. It was like, if I went first, I would have just cleaned up half his army because he had so much stuff within my threat range. But in terms of like sort of better players playing like more mainstream sort of Space Marine factions, I don't think so. No, the Marine matchups I've played have tended to follow in that like sort of John Lennon style of White Scars. But basically, the core is just building out of the Indominus models. So it's Assault Intercessors, Blade Guard Veterans, Outriders, maybe Attack Bikes, and like a small amount of characters to just kind of hold it together. An Apothecary invariably, and so not much infiltration.
What about one of the big things for 9th that I thought was going to be a huge game changer was the reinforcements, the outflanking. Are you seeing much of that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the Salamanders list that was terrorising people pretty much before the Codex dropped was like built around that. It was, here's a bunch of aggressors, spend some CP, now they double shoot. With the nerf to aggressors and with the sort of Codex change, maybe emphasising other Marine factions, I'm not sure. I haven't seen it myself. I haven't played against it. I played a few times against Marines in these sort of tournament series, but it's generally against like the close combat oriented intercessor, assault intercessor based Marine armies. Not much like fast stuff, not much deep striking. Mostly just move up the table and just out efficient you.
Well, I think a lot of the game is just getting into the middle and staying there.
And so on the smaller tables, you don't need a deep strike to do that, right?
You don't really need to get into your opponent's deployment zone as much. You don't. There's a lot of that sort of emphasis on just being in the middle and being tough. And bikes are really good in the way that bikes are just turn one, they're in the middle. They're already where they need to be, and then they just have to hold.
Yeah, for sure. So maybe that's it. Maybe Outriders sort of became the new, like, well, instead of deep striking, like instead of infiltrating a unit of like, whatever, infiltrators. I can just move my Outriders if I need to, and if it doesn't suit me to take the centre, I don't need to. So you have that choice. You're not kind of committing, in deployment.
Yeah, and the other thing with the that reinforcements thing that I thought was going to be utilised a lot was using it to protect stuff.
Yeah.
Going, I've got this really powerful unit, but I know that if he goes first, he's going to shoot it dead. So I'm going to reinforce it. Like, do you see that used much?
So no, but I reckon a big part of that would be terrain. So because the TTS meta, and I should have mentioned this before actually, the TTS tournaments I'm playing in are almost always quite heavy on terrain.
Yeah.
Some of them use the WTC terrain sets, which have like Nova L's in your deployment zone pretty often. A lot of line of sight blocking in the centre of the table. It is not hard to hide a smallish army in almost any of the maps, and so unless what you're bringing is like a super heavy tank, then you can kind of hide what you need to for the most part. And then because it's 5 turns as well, I mean, this is again a bit speculative. If you're deep striking, you're only getting 4 turns of doing stuff, which is like a full 20% reduction in how much,
and especially
because
chances are you're not going to be deep striking onto objectives that much because they're in the centre and you're coming on from the sides if you're like outflanking.
Plus, given how MSU is so popular at the moment, and it's not that hard. Like if I'm playing against someone who's deep striking, it's really not that hard for me to put a 2-man unit of bikes over there, put a 2-man unit of bikes over there, and have that 9-inch bubble. So that the only place you can come in is your deployment zone anyway.
Particularly on the smaller tables as well. Like because it's smaller, it's actually really easy to just go, oh wow, I actually only need 2 units to screen out my entire backfield.
Exactly, yeah.
I think like when they first said we're going to let anything deep strike, I was just like, oh, here we fucking go. This will be interesting.
Yeah, well, you were right. Like I remember you said it was like pretty much when 9th dropped, you were like, Salamander's going to be busted. And like the army, pretty much right after that was Salamander's deep striking aggressive.
As soon as I saw, you can outflank anything, I was like, paint and get invest in green paint. Invest now.
But maybe less so now that like that they've been toned down a bit, and that the meta's moved towards like fast MSU. Or at least a lot of armies do that. So you wouldn't really want a game plan designed around outflanking, I don't think.
Agreed.
And
so let's talk a bit about the terrain that you see at these Tabletop Simulator events. Like,
sure.
Because obviously, one of the main things that a lot of tournaments struggle with is having not only quality, effective, useful terrain, but consistent terrain across all of the tables. Whereas because Tabletop Simulator being a simulation, you could literally have every single person playing on the exact same table.
So there's like 3 different things that happen. There's people who use the WTC terrain, which is I quite like it. So that's good. It's quite heavy. It's also designed around the sort of missions like. There's sort of one set of maps for like 1, 1, 2, 1, 3. Another set of maps for 2, 1, 2, 2, 3, etc. And then there's like a heavy, a light, medium version for each. So quite a lot of variety, but they'll sort of lock in advance. Which one you're playing, which mission you're playing. The TO will kind of roll for that, and then you'll jump in, and it will be like standardized. Everyone playing the same. You have the tactical tortoise ones, the terrain is bespoke. So he's essentially, Trevi, the guy who runs it, has gone in, or got people to go in for each of the missions and make a map that suits it. So for any given mission, you're playing on the same map within a season, for better or worse, but they are pretty well thought out. They're a bit weird, so Trevi does things like the ruins in the tactical tortoise tournaments are like not ruins, they're actually just obstacles, and so he makes certain choices like that.
So using different keywords for different rules.
It looks like a ruin, but actually it's an obstacle that has the obscuring keyword, so it functions differently. And so he sort of put a lot of thought into that, because
that's a good solution, because one of the challenges that I know you might be able to shed some light on this is, like, if you've got a wall that's a physical wall that you can't place a model in the middle of, and your base is over an inch, all I do is put myself just over an inch away from the wall, and now it's like, well, if you are against the wall, I'm not within engagement range, but you can't fit on the other side of the wall, so it makes me unchargeable. So I think that's where obstacles comes into it, because obstacles has a rule where it's like if you're within 2 inches of it or something.
Yeah, maybe so. It's funnily enough, I hadn't actually even thought of that angle. Like what I got out of it was that you can get cover from it without being able to be shot, because the obstacle itself is obscuring. So you can get cover, you can benefit from cover from it without exposing yourself to being shot through the windows. But that's an interesting point. I'd have to look at the terrain keywords to comment that.
Because that's one thing that there's a few things that I think we've still got yet to be answered, which is one of like tying into what we were saying earlier about TOs needing to make these decisions for people. Is things like, well, how do you handle that? Can you just say, oh, he counts as being halfway through the wall?
Yeah, sure.
You know,
because it's breachable, right?
Because it's a breachable wall. I can walk through it. I can't physically place the model there, so you use like a pseudo wobbly model syndrome.
Sure.
Or just little things like if there's a rooftop and they put a ring of guys all the way around the rooftop, can you charge that? You know, like I know now that engagement range is 5 inches vertically, so you can just go, I'll just base the...
And the WTC ruins are designed with that in mind, so it's like all the levels are like exactly 5 inches, so that you can attack someone, you can fight someone above you, right? So just the final one, the other one is the Pro Tabletop Tournament has a player place terrain system. Where you get a bunch of different like ruins and crates and forests, and you alternate with your opponent to place all the pieces.
Oh my god!
And I kind of hated it.
Yeah, that's. We actually had this conversation the other day because I'm redoing the terrain for the tournaments that I run. And basically, my plan is to come up with a map for each mission, so that each mission has a specific terrain layout, which factors in the deployment zone, factors in the objective placement, and tries to make a balanced table. That's my thing. But when we were sort of just spitballing the different ways that we could handle terrain at tournaments, one of the ideas that was thrown around is, well, GW say you get 1 piece per 12-inch square, so why don't we just put the terrain on the side and go, alright, you and your opponent take turns placing 1 piece in each 12 by 12 square. And I'm like, oh, that just feels so like susceptible to abuse.
Yeah, if you did it that way, where it's this strict rule about there is a grid, you have to populate it, and you can't place like 2 pieces in the same grid space. That would sort of control some of the abuse, I reckon.
Yeah.
But my worry about it would mostly be that it just seems like a totally new metagame you're adding to the game itself, where it's hard to pick up that general skill.
Yeah.
Like, because different tourneys have different rules.
I do like those sorts of things. Like, one of the things I missed from, like, 6th edition was the psychic phase. It was a complete mini game within the game.
Yeah, okay.
The way you worked all of that stuff out. Like, you had to... Did you play much?
No. I started, like, end of 7th.
Yeah. So, the way that psychic phase would work was basically... You had each psyker had a warp charge value, so they would get X number of dice, and then you'd roll a d6 and you add that many dice, and that's your warp charge pool.
Sure.
And then you cast powers from people and you use dice. So if it might need to go off on a 7, you could go, I'm just going to roll 2 dice. Yeah. Or you might be like, I really want this power to go off, I'm going to roll fucking 6.
Yeah.
As long as they
so
all
it's like all your psychers are channeling together.
Yeah. So you had this, but then also if your opponent has their pool of dice and they want to deny something, they could be like, I don't really care about that, I'll let that go through. And now this is the one power that I really want to deny, so I'm just going to fucking throw all my dice at it.
Sure.
And it meant that the more psychers that you had, the more power you had to deny your opponent, and the more power you had to prevent them from. Like it was a piece of fucking art. It was so amazingly fun.
Yeah.
Just the dynamics and the order and the sequence in which you do your powers, and you try and bait people out by like you'd throw 4 dice at a crappy power. Just so that they would think that that's the power that you want, and like it was fucking so good. I miss it so much.
Sure. No, so that sounds very fun, but it also sounds like something where, like, from game to game, tournament to tournament, that sort of mini game itself is the same.
Yes, true.
With something like terrain placement, unless it's sort of very standardized, the challenge is that in any given tournament, you're trying to like really quickly read and like comprehend a set of rules about how to place terrain.
Yeah, exactly.
Understand it well enough to then think through, well, what's a good strategy for my list against my opponent.
And even the way that would affect army construction. If you know that you can place terrain in such a way that you can, jump from piece to piece, and so you're saying that they didn't have any restrictions on where you can place things?
They didn't. Well, so the restrictions were in any quarter you couldn't have more than 3 large pieces of terrain, where the large pieces were the ruins and the forests, and you couldn't place a piece of terrain within 3 of another piece. So I think the way it felt to me was that it just didn't matter that much. That me and the opponent would just essentially create like a mirror of each other.
Yeah.
Because all we needed to do was ensure we had somewhere to hide in our opponent's zone if we went second.
Yeah.
And then around that it was just a bunch of I guess there's space there, I'll try and fit it in.
Yeah.
And maybe sort of more tactical players who played that sort of format more would kind of get into it. And
I could just see lots of things. There's lots of ways that you could really mess with people, like going, okay, well, I'm going to put along this side of the table, put all of the ruins so that I can outflank on and he can't all-spec scan me, or just stuff like that.
Yeah.
I worry that the second you start,
increases the cheese ceiling.
It sort of creates a bigger divide between the top players and the bottom,
Yeah, sure.
Because the people who are able to abuse those things, you're just giving them more fuel. You're giving them more opportunities to abuse things. And the people who aren't are just it's going to ruin the game for them.
Yeah, they come into a tourney, it's like, I don't really know what I'm doing, I'll just kind of, have at it. And it's like, I lost in deployment. I lost before deployment. I lost in the terrain place.
Yeah, exactly. The terrain placement phase.
You don't want that, do you?
Yeah. That being said, I'm pretty sure GW did release something recently that was effectively that. Okay. It was player placed terrain.
Sure. And
it was like you had a number of points depending on the size of the game that you were playing, and then you could use those points to purchase GW terrain kits, so that you could fucking place them in. They had a lot more intricate, but pretty much everybody's...
A happy coincidence that it involves purchasing GW terrain kits. Yeah.
It's almost like they're trying to sell you something. Yeah. And then they sold it as, this is the new tournament standard, and every single tournament's gone, no, it's not, that's bad. Simply because then you need to add an extra half an hour at least onto the rounds, as people
for an edition that sort of sold itself as being fast and streamlined, right? Yeah, no, that's it.
All right, so we're talking about fast and streamlined. How have you found the Tabletop Simulator games in the tournament format? I've played casual games that last 7 hours.
Yeah, sure.
Because we're just farting around and whatever. But in a tournament, is there time pressure? Is there time limits?
So, for the most part, people don't bother with clocks. If you're doing one of the stream games, I think if you win a pod, or if you're in the pod final in the tactical course ones, I think you are clocked. In my experience, it's it takes about 3 to 4 hours to finish a game. And I have played on clocks before in real life, and I'm a reasonably fast player, I don't clock out. But maybe it's once you sort of have that luxury, and because you're sort of, often you're playing at weird time zones, people have kids running in and stuff while they're playing, and often, at the start you just kind of spend a bit of time sorting out the logistics of just, how do we connect? Who's hosting? We dropped out, I better save just in case we lose our game, and we can jump in at the same point. There are these sort of extra little things that come about that make it worth giving yourself a bit of extra time. So I'd say the average TTS game, in my experience, lasts a bit longer than the average tournament game.
Yep.
But I'd say the biggest reason for that is mostly just there's no time pressure. There isn't a third game immediately afterwards. There's another game in a week. So you can kind of just you can afford to be relaxed.
Definitely.
And but I did have one game that was really long. It was I started at 8 AM and finished at 2 PM. It was 6 hours.
Fuck.
It was a lovely guy, to be fair, but it was and
I think
that's happened.
I think Tabletop Simulator, and this sort of ties into what we were saying earlier about the measuring to the 0.0 of the inch, right? Because it has the capacity to achieve that extreme accuracy, there's the temptation to not only do it yourself, but hold your opponent to that as well. And that can really drag out the game. If you think a game I played a while back on TTS, one of the last ones I played, in fact it might have been the last one I played, I was playing against Harlequins, and I had I had a deep striking into the Terminators, and he's farting around for fucking ages, just making sure he screens out his backfield. And I've just said to him, look, I know you have the capacity to screen.
I'm happy for you to say it's screen, but I won't do it.
Yeah, just say this unit's here and here. That's enough to cover things. And I'll just drop over here somewhere. It's fine, and you can hold me to that. Yeah. But he's like, no, I want to do it right. I want to get it right. And literally, without a word of exaggeration, it took him an hour and a half for his first movement phase. Yeah. And I'm just sitting there like, this is garbage. Like,
sure, I can see how that sort of experience would turn you off.
Like, if it was on a chess clock, well, you just used your entire allotment in your first movement phase.
Yeah, sure.
Like, so it was really just like off-putting, which is why I ask in a tournament format. Is there a time limit? Because if I rocked up to a tournament and somebody did that, I'd be like, well, I needed an adult, I need a TO, because this is fun.
So you could clock someone, but I think other than that one game I had that went on for ages, like the people I'm playing against are mostly more experienced than me at TTS.
Yeah.
Like quite often I'll learn
if you're playing 2 or 3 games a week, so...
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like I play a fair bit of TTS, exactly. But it's just the sort of thing that, like, because people are playing it so much, like, yes, it's really slow. If you play maybe the first 5 or 10 games you play on TTS, it's going to take longer than a normal game.
Yeah.
Even if you're clocked, it'll take you longer.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, the fact that you can roll dice really quickly...
Oh, the dice rolling in it is so good. So
it's beautiful,
The way that it's just, you pick them up, you bucket it, you can have it color-coded, you can just remove 3s, remove this, roll it again, give it to you. Like, that's so good.
And the other thing is the fact that, I've said this before, but you can create auras around your stuff. So if I'm trying to screen out my backfield, I'm essentially just, I'll pull up a 9-inch aura around, my witches and my skyweavers, and just sort of move them. Sorry, I just move them so that, like, I won't even really bother to measure much. I'm just eyeballing it.
Yeah.
But if a newer player doesn't sort of know that's an option, and they're trying to literally measure 9 in, and it's very hard to, like, guesstimate distances on TTS.
It is, yeah.
So, on the table you can kind of just, that's roughly 9, like, I'll measure it later, but I'll only check it if it matters. But on TTS, it's, like, quite hard to guesstimate.
Yeah.
But if you're new enough that you're not using things like auras, and, like, leaving the rings up so that you can kind of see how the game's playing out, I can see how it would take a lot longer. Yeah, for sure. But I reckon there are other tools to be fast.
Yes, absolutely. I was just sort of thinking, like, from a tournament perspective, having time limits also shapes the meta.
It does, yeah.
Because you can't just be like, I'm going to bring 300 Plague Bearers, because you're never going to finish your game in a 3-hour round.
Sure.
Whereas if you have unlimited rounds, if you say this game could take you 2 days, that's okay.
Yeah.
Like, people will be like, I'm going to bring so many fucking Plague Bearers. Like,
then they have to be like, but then I have to move them on TTS with my mouth. With my mouse and move around ruins. And
there is an advantage.
There's another pressure.
You can highlight multiple models and just click and drag the whole lot.
But it doesn't work that well with the terrain.
No.
So you can, if you're moving 5 intercessors up through a clear part of the middle of the map, it's great. Yeah. But if you're trying to move 200 or like 20 termagants, and it matters because, like, the squads are differentiated and, like, you can't sort of see that easily where the boundaries are, and you have to sort of highlight in a way where you get one squad but not the others, and you're trying to drag them through terrain. It is painstaking.
Yeah.
So I think like I would much rather not play a horde on TTS. So I
really
had to play a horde. I prefer to do it IRL on a clock than on TTS without one. Just from the fiddliness alone.
I'm really tempted just to troll and enter a TTS tournament with just like, just like 150 cultists. And just be like, lol. And they're like, okay, my first turn takes an hour and a half, and by that time the person's going to be like, I don't want to play anymore, you just win.
It's like, I concede. Concede hammer. I like it.
Yeah. Just force people into conceding.
There was a thing, it reminds me a bit of, I don't know if you ever sort of played StarCraft or...
I did, a little bit back in the day.
So there's a strategy I saw someone play in StarCraft 2 where it was like they just tried to persuade the other person that they were AFK. So they take a worker and, like, move it away and create a second base somewhere hidden. And then as the other player would scout their first base, they just see that they haven't built anything. They've just got, and because they could quickly make another worker to replace the one they take to make a base. So they just assume that they're AFK, and they'll kind of say, "Hey, you there?" and he just doesn't respond. And
meanwhile,
he's building another house. So the whole strategy is just around this kind of, meme deception.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work that well. Like, I'd feel a bit bad if it was actually an OP strat.
Yeah.
But it's kind of more like just a funny thing. And yeah, I think I think that stuff's really I rate it.
Yeah. One of the other things that I do really like about TTS is how easy it is to stream your own game and record your own game.
For sure.
Like, you can just hit fucking screen record and then play your game. And if at any stage you're like, I went to the loo and I came back and things were all different, and you're like, I swear to God, his rhino was at least 6 inches back that way, you can just low-key just replay the last 10 minutes while you were away. And you could, I'm not saying that people are out there cheating, but
it's an extra
there's an extra layer, yeah. And then on top of that, you can also, if you lose, you can actually go back and just watch your game and be like, this is exactly where I fucked up.
Oh, so I had a really good game against Simon Drodjkovic. I'm probably butchering his name, but against his GSC a couple of mornings ago. And he's a very, very good player, much more experienced than I am, both in real life and on TTS.
Yeah.
And there was sort of a turn where he put me in a position where I just had to kind of do a bunch of things.
Yeah.
I had to kill some stuff, otherwise I'm just going to lose the primary. And he was like, all right, let's save it here. And we did, and then we sort of played the game. I ended up losing. But we sort of we were able to just okay, let's load it now. Load this game state and just have a think about what would have happened if things had moved differently.
Yeah.
So I think in addition to, sort of recording and being able to then, sort of keep people honest, or just record for the sake of distributing it later because people are interested, there's also, I think, a really kind of powerful pedagogical angle as well, where you can just save in a complicated board state and then just save that, take some screenshots or whatever's appropriate, and then just send it to your play group, hey fellas, here's where I was, here's where I was, turn 3, here's the situation, here's the scoreboard.
Well,
what do you think I should do?
That's actually really interesting as well. So coaching is pretty highly frowned upon in tournaments, right? If you're playing against Jeremy and I as a spectator walk up and be he's left his characters out in the open. Right? He'd be like, shut the fuck up, Dean, get out of here, what are you doing? That's bad, right? There's no protections against that in TTS.
That's true, yeah.
You could very well be live streaming your game whilst you're playing it with an earpiece in and an array of coaches. You could do that.
If anyone cared enough about winning for that to be worth their while, for sure.
Yeah. I think like you were saying earlier, the quality of player that's attending is what stops all of these things from being a real threat.
Yeah. Most of the players I'm playing against are good enough that there would be only a handful of people better than them at their faction that would be worth being coached by.
But this is something for ATC that I've been pushing, which is the Australian Team Championships for those listening, is having each player have their own personal coach. And that's just so that you've got somebody there that the coach isn't allowed to give advice during the game, but it gives you somebody that they can look up things for you, they can start preparing the dice for you, they can, all of these various little bits and pieces, they can record your score for you.
And then you have someone who's been there and seen the game that you can kind of bounce ideas off later as well, right?
Yeah, and it's huge in the way that it just frees you up to focus on just thinking about what you're doing and when.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think having a coach with you, is really good. And just for example, your opponent's like, oh yeah, I'm going to go charge him with my Libby, and you can just turn to your coach and be like, oh, pull up the librarian stats. And then you just keep going, now continue what you're doing, and then next minute there's a codex in your hand and the rules are there. It's there's a lot of value to that, I reckon.
Yeah, I actually think this wouldn't be appropriate for a tournament, but having sort of playing fun, or not fun games, but training games, where you're there playing with someone else who sort of knows your faction.
Yeah.
It doesn't even really matter if they're sort of better than you, but just someone who's kind of also has played this faction a bit, has some experience. and you can kind of bounce ideas off.
Yeah.
You know, even just in the moment, just for the sake of learning.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of potential there too, because something I noticed about my own play is that I'll kind of get into ruts where I'll play a situation similarly. I'll be like, and sometimes just sort of seeing how somebody else plays that, or having somebody say, "Oh, why are you doing that?" and forcing you to justify yourself. Can just be really powerful for like keeping you honest, right?
It can, however, be somewhat. It can become a crutch. If you've got somebody there that's like, you're about to do something dumb, and they're like, "Yeah, hang on, why don't you do this other thing that's actually smart?" And you go, "Oh shit, you're right," and then you do it. But because you didn't have that epiphany, they did.
Then you learn best by making the mistakes.
Yeah, exactly.
You learn much better if you just fucked it.
Yeah, exactly.
Got smashed.
And then
oh, okay. Turns out I shouldn't charge.
Yeah.
And you do fusion Harleys without close combat weapons into a bloodthirster.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So you've got to be careful. Like, yes, it's valuable to have somebody that can bounce ideas off. But perhaps the appropriate way to do it would be for you to make the mistake and then them just call you bad.
Yeah, sure. And tell you that.
And say, well, you should have done this. Like, for example...
Can you be my coach? Yes, you're a bad player. Oh, thanks, team.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. No, like, for example, I had a game against Stewie last night, and I wrapped one of his rhinos with my noise rings, and he used Gate of Infinity to pull it out, and he put it directly in the centre of the table. And this was an mission where we had 4 objective markers in a diamond shape, so there was nothing in the centre of the table. And I'm like, you're bad. Like, why is that rhino there? He's like, I was trying to stop you from controlling the centre. And I'm like, there's nothing in the centre that I want.
Yeah, sure.
Well, that rhino should be on an objective in my backfield, so that now I have to turn around with my berserkers and go that way when I actually want to go that way. Like, you know... But I called him on it then and there.
Yeah. Did he change the position in the moment?
No, he defended. He's like, no, trust me, it's worth putting it in the centre. And I'm like, oh, I don't know what you're talking about, but sure.
Well, yeah, I see where he's coming from.
He ended up winning the game because I was running a meme list.
Yeah,
it's just like lols.
Yeah. So it's hard with meme lists. It's hard to know whether he won because. In spite of this mistake, or because he made the right play, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like he was probably going to win anyway.
Yeah. And it's always hard to take advice from your opponent.
Yeah.
Even if, me and Stewie are really good mates. So he knows that I wouldn't be giving him advice that's going to fuck him. I wouldn't be trying to manipulate him and do that to him. But it is still hard to, when your opponent says, you bad, do this.
Yeah.
There's a level of, difficulty there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so one thing is, I don't know if this resonates, but I do feel like when I'm playing, sometimes the things that I think about my opponent doing as right or wrong are kind of coloured by my own sort of emotions.
Yeah.
Like they'll go in for some charge and I'll be like, fuck, I'm really scared of that because I'm scared of them killing my stuff. But it's just kind of like the wrong move. But because there's this sort of, if they did the right thing, it's just like sit on an objective. That's like less kind of scary. It doesn't give me this kind of emotional reaction.
Well, I often operate on this theory of like when you're trying to make a decision on whether or not you want to do something, right? So say you fail one of your saves and you've got 1 CP left. It's your last CP. And you're like, do I use it to reroll that save and then possibly fail it, or possibly whatever? Or do I save it and you're like, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? One of the best things to do, in my opinion, is ask yourself, does my opponent want me to do this?
Yeah, sure.
Like, are they looking at me going, spend the CP, you dickhead, go on? Or are they looking at me going, oh fuck, if he spends that CP and passes, like, fuck!
Yeah, my whole plan is ruined.
And they're like, oh, don't spend that CP!
Yeah, sure.
Like, ask yourself and look at them, look into the fucking eyes and be like, alright, like, I'm thinking of doing this.
Yeah.
And just stare at them and see, like, if they look like, oh fuck, then be like, yeah, I'll do it. Like, if they don't want me to do it, that means I should probably want to do it.
Yeah, sure.
So when your opponent gives you advice, you've definitely got to take that with a grain of salt.
You definitely want, yeah, for sure.
Like,
yeah.
But I mean, it's obviously different in garage games where you're playing with mates.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, what else on TTS? Have you got anything else on TTS that you think is valuable to bring up, or?
What am I thinking about? I mean, so I've been thinking a fair bit about like sort of Harlequins as a faction and like Eldari and like, so I started out playing the edition with Craft Worlds and they seem to have like, at least statistically, like one of the worst win rates in the game. It's like 30% or something. It just sort of like puzzling about like why it is that this kind of, this army, Craftworlds, it didn't really lose anything. Like, things went up in points from 8th to 9th, but not by much.
Yeah.
And they're still really efficient. They still have the good version of Expert Crafters where they reroll a hit and a wound.
Yeah.
They've got a lot of flat 3 damage, a lot of high strength.
Losing the ability to have multiple negs. That was one big nail in their coffin.
Maybe so, yeah.
In fact, that was probably the only nail in their coffin, but it was big enough that it pinned the lid down.
Well, so I reckon my thought is, honestly, it's mostly just the missions are different, and that because what they do efficiently is mostly shooting. It's mostly from things like tanks. Like, that's what's fast and shoots well.
Yeah.
That's not the sort of unit that's appropriate to charge into another enemy on an objective.
Yeah.
Unlike something like a squad of Harlequins, which can shoot, but they also love charging things and hitting things, and so I think it's mostly about that. But I have been puzzling over that. I'm not confident about that analysis. It still seems a bit like maybe there are good Craftworlds lists that we haven't discovered, but just thinking through exactly what it is. New meta, yeah. It's all about those Revenant Titans. So just puzzling through that and just trying to sort of solve my factions. And so I play all the flavors of Eldari, just find things in the books that might be have value that is being a bit underappreciated. Because I think the Harlequins meta at least is very there's not a lot of units to choose from, but it's almost always 5 to 6 fusion boats, 2 to 3 squads of haywire bikes, a couple of characters, you're done. And it's a good list, but it still has some sort of weaknesses too. And so just trying to use the other books to kind of supplement that. That's been my main puzzle. I've lost sleep over just trying to but what if I fit that in there and then take some points off of this? And
literally the amount of times that I've had a dream about a list or a unit, and then I wake up at 2 a.m. And I'll just get out my phone, and the missus has to roll over because the bright screen of Battlescribe illuminates the whole room. I remember once I had a dream that I was this was when I was running Death Watch. I had a dream that I was in a Dread Knight, but it was a black Dread Knight with a silver arm, and I was a Death Watch guy in that.
Death Watch Dread Knight.
And it had an Infernus heavy bolter in one fist, and it was and I was just running around this battlefield just fucking up all these guys, and I woke up from it that was awesome, and then I was like, would adding Grey Knights to a Death Watch list with some Dread Knights be fucking awesome? And then I was looking at it, I was this was back when the Grandmaster Dread Knight could get a 2-up involved, and I was like, get fucked, that's actually sick. And I was plugging that in, and I was just laying there at 2 a.m. writing this fucking list. I was so excited. Then I woke up the next day and I was like, actually, that's kind of bad. It's actually not even good.
It's like the Warhammer equivalent of the artist who's inspired by their dreams. I dreamt of a beautiful sunset, strange monoliths, and it's
and then you paint it the next day, and you're like, what the fuck is this? What is this?
It's like a bad trip.
But there's been tons of times where I've done it. The worst one is when you're driving. Because I spend 2 hours a day in the car driving. And there's nothing worse than when I get 10 minutes into my drive and I have this awesome idea for a list. And I'm I can't pull over and I can't write it down because I'm fucking driving.
You have to repeat it to yourself.
So you're just you just do this, and then eventually you'll forget. Your brain will wander off to something else. You'll be driving, you'll get to work, you'll start working, and then lunchtime comes and you're like, what was that fucking list I was cooking up? What was it? How did I somehow figured out a way that I could balance the power level so that I could get this stuff into Deep Strike, but I can't remember now how I did it. And you're damn it, it's lost. The worst one is driving. But alright, well, unless you've got anything else you have on that, I think that's a pretty good point to wrap it up.
Yeah, for sure, man. But I had a good time talking to you.
Yeah, that was good. So hopefully this comes out good quality and people enjoyed listening to our little rants with our random tangents.
What I'm hoping is that you go through in the edit phase and just anything silly I said, you edit it out and just give me put a bunch of filters on. Make my skin look smooth. Maybe Photoshop my muscles out a bit. That's what I'm. That
sounds good. I'll buff you up.
Thank you. And do the opposite to yourself.
Yeah.
I'm going to pull out the beard.
I'm going to give you the bald head, and I'm going to give you the long luscious hair.
It's head swap.
Face swap technology applied.
Nice.
But yeah, that's sort of the main goal that I was hoping that we would get to, and I think we did quite well, was just raising awareness for Tabletop Simulator, getting people interested in it, and then also sort of talking a bit about the meta and giving them an idea of what to expect, so the people who listen to this can go, you know what, I'm going to give Tabletop Simulator tournament a go, and they can go in with a bit more
I think
information.
I would hope that if someone is considering that they won't be put off by what I was saying about the meta being, or like the players being very good, like they are. But there are sort of introductory tournaments you can play. Yeah. There are lots of ways you can pick up games. I think there are even servers where new players can kind of have like a practice game with someone more experienced to just even learn the rules. Yeah. So I think there is something there for anyone who's sort of TTS inclined, and it's not an expensive game either. So if you pay your $20, you don't like it, you've learned a lesson. Yeah. So there are different ways of enjoying it. So that's just one thing I wanted to get across.
Yeah, for sure. All right, awesome. Well, thanks for your time.
No worries. And, thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm sure you'll be on again, because we could talk for hours.
For sure.
Various things. So I'm sure you'll be on again. Yeah. But we'll take it from there.
Blog for the Blood God presents the BloodyOath podcast.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. I really hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, make sure you like and subscribe to this YouTube channel and share it on Facebook and all of that good shit. And also chuck a comment below with what you would like us to discuss in the next episode. If there's any particular guests that you would like to see, any particular topics you'd like to see me discuss, any opinions you would like to know, just chuck a comment below and I will most likely get to it. So yeah, let's get a conversation going. And if you're a player on Tabletop Simulator tournaments, I'd love to see some comments below about your experiences and what your thoughts are. And if you've never played Tabletop Simulator before, chuck a comment below and I'm sure we'll be able to help you out. I also did a video tutorial, which I'll link below, which goes through every single step from how to download the program, how to install it, how to get the 40k add-on pack, how to function within the game, how the controls work and everything. So if it's something that you've never played before but you're interested in, definitely follow the links in the description to my tutorial on how to play Tabletop Simulator. I think you'll find they're of great value. Alright, thanks for tuning in, and I'll talk to you next time.